In 2014, deep learning models operated under a strict structural requirement. Every input and output had to be a vector of a single predetermined size. Standard feed-forward networks rely on static matrix dimensions. You pass in an exact n-dimensional vector to produce an exact m-dimensional output. However, language is rarely static. Processing 14-word and 50-word sentences through these fixed weights is mathematically incompatible with traditional DNNs. Early recurrent neural networks attempted to bypass this by updating a hidden state at each timestep, but they were limited by a requirement for one-to-one temporal alignment between the input and the output. To perform tasks like machine translation, where input and output lengths differ and word orders shift, researchers needed a way to map variable-length sequences to variable-length targets. Machine translation requires navigating two distinct variables. The input length t and the output length t' are rarely the same, and the alignment between them is often non-monotonic. The solution required a model that could estimate the conditional probability of an entire output sequence given the entire input sequence. This formula shows how the joint probability is factorized autoregressively. Each target word is predicted based on the words that came before it, all conditioned on a single fixed-dimensional representation of the input, labeled V. This approach was formalized in the 2014 paper Sequence-to-Sequence Learning with Neural Networks, authored by Sutskever, Vinyals, and Li. Their work demonstrated that mapping arbitrary sequences required decoupling the recurrent loops, forcing the information through a high-dimensional vector bottleneck. The architecture employs two separate long-short-term memory networks, isolating the processing of the source from the generation of the target. To capture complex linguistic structures, they used a deep 4-layer stack for both the encoder and the decoder. Each layer contains 1,000 hidden units, operating on 1,000-dimensional word embeddings. As the encoder reads the input tokens one by one, it continuously updates its internal hidden and cell states across the entire deep stack. When the encoder reaches the end of the source sentence, it stops. Its final hidden states are collected into a single 8,000-dimensional context vector, V. This vector initializes the decoder LSTM. Using the semantic information compressed within V, the decoder then autoregressively generates the target sequence, one word at a time. While this creates a model with 384 million parameters, the sequential nature of the process means that doubling the parameter capacity adds almost no extra computational cost per step. The success of the system depends on the encoder's ability to compress the meaning of an entire sentence into that single high-dimensional vector. In 2014, the prevailing assumption was that LSTMs would fail on sentences longer than 35 words due to memory decay in recurrent cells. The performance drop on long sentences was a failure of optimization geometry rather than a limit of the LSTM's memory capacity. We can see this by looking at an unrolled computation graph, which reveals a problem called minimal time lag. In a natural forward translation, the first source word is separated from its target counterpart by the entire length of the input sentence, a gap of t timesteps. During backpropagation through time, the gradient signal must travel back across that entire gap to establish the initial connection between the two languages. This long temporal distance causes the gradient to decay, making it difficult for the network to optimize the most critical early alignments in a sentence. The researchers bypassed this optimization barrier by introducing a simple data transformation, the reversed source sequence trick. They found that if you feed the source sentence backwards while keeping the target sequence in its natural order, the geometry of the problem changes. Now, the first English word is processed last by the encoder. This places it immediately adjacent to the first French word, resulting in a minimal time lag of 1. The average distance between all corresponding word pairs across the sentence is still the same, but the crucial first connection is now instantaneous. This immediate proximity allows backpropagation to easily establish communication between the sequences, anchoring the training process from the very first word. This single trick reduced test perplexity from 5.8 to 4.7 and allowed the LSTM to maintain high translation accuracy even on sentences exceeding 50 words. While reversing the sequence addresses vanishing gradients, these deep 4-layer architectures are highly susceptible to exploding gradients. To stabilize training, the authors enforced a hard gradient norm clipping constraint. If the norm exceeds 5.0, they rescale the gradient to that cap, preserving the vector's direction while limiting its magnitude. Once the model is trained, the next challenge is inference. Finding the best translation requires searching through a vocabulary of 80,000 words for every step of the output. Exhaustive search is computationally impossible, so they used a left-to-right beam search. Unlike a greedy search that only picks the single best word at each step, beam search maintains a small set of the most likely partial hypotheses. Their test showed that a beam size of only 2 captured nearly all the gains of a much larger beam of 12. This demonstrated that accurate autoregressive inference could be performed efficiently, even with a limited search breadth. On the WMT'14 English-to-French benchmark, a single reversed LSTM reached 30.59 BLEU. When combined into an ensemble of 5, the score rose to 34.81, surpassing the phrase-based baseline of 33.30. This was a milestone in machine translation. It was the first time an end-to-end neural network outperformed a heavily engineered statistical system on a large-scale task. A 2D PCA projection of the latent space reveals how the model organizes information. We see clear clusters where sentences with similar semantic meanings are grouped together. The representations are highly sensitive to word order. The sentences "Mary admires John" and "John admires Mary" are mapped to distinct, well-separated points in the space. However, the model is invariant to active versus passive voice. Sentences expressing the same meaning through different grammatical structures map to nearly identical coordinates. This suggests the network discovered a way to represent the underlying thought, independent of the specific syntax used to express it. By surpassing the phrase-based baseline on the WMT'14 task, Seq2Seq showed that a single, differentiable neural network could replace the multi-stage pipelines of traditional statistical machine translation. This study formally established the Encoder-Decoder framework, which serves as the structural foundation for modern generative models. The architecture's primary bottleneck, compressing a whole sentence into a single vector, was the specific limitation that led to the development of attention mechanisms later that year. By demonstrating that deep representations could handle variable-length sequences, the authors provided the theoretical groundwork for the subsequent development of attention-based architectures.